So my name is Kevin, and I like organizing communities. I also like to bike a little bit. So I haven't found out to combine those yet, but maybe I will. But I think I want to start out by saying before the why, what do I want? Because I think sometimes you can always say hey, this is working for me right now. But if you don't know why I want these things, it can be a little bit more difficult to determine if they also fit for you in the same way. So basically, if people maybe say something about me, I'm very price conscious and time efficient. That I really like to get things done. I really like to not do it the expensive way, and it's always because either I've been really broke or I've been just doing it on my own terms, so I never really had any money, and I think I also spent too much money just having resources running on old cloud projects. But you can also say it in another way, I'm really cheap and I'm also lazy, because I think that's also a way you can say that's the defining thing of me. I want something that doesn't cost anything, and I'm also only want to spend very little time actually achieving it. So I have certain things of what I want to achieve. I say I want to deploy everything, and I also want to do it really fast because I need to get it done. And I also don't want to lock myself in, because that seems very important for me, that I can take my skills and I can apply it in multiple ways. I don't want to learn technology and then be deprecated 2 years later. And I also want to do it cheaply, and meaning that it should something ideally it should be something I'd never pay for actually. So I think this is some of the things actually serverless really all fulfill these needs. It's the idea of services that you're kind of not doing anything really, you're really just giving something to run, and the idea has always been you're not paying for what you're not using, so you're only paying for when it's actually in use. But it always seems like this magic idea. For example, in 2014, Amazon Lambda launched, and since then that has been up and down for what have actually been interesting related to that service, but it's still nobody or not everyone is using that. So I think that's also interesting and something we should talk about. So what is serverless? Serverless has no definition really. I think if you ask every single cloud provider, they will tell you something different. And that's also sometimes the most terrible thing, is that they all have their own way of implementing this. If you use Google Cloud, they will maybe say Cloud Function, so you're basically always depending on how the cloud provider uses it, or maybe even if you implement it yourself, you are ending up with a proprietary stack. So I think, why hasn't this worked for me until now? I think the first reason has always been some of these things, it's slow to learn. It's always also sometimes been slow to use, because you kind of were hitting these cold starts or something like that. But it's always been platform login. I don't know if anybody used some of these APIs, but they were always super specific. You were also always behind the runtime that you didn't control. So for example, on Amazon Lambda, you were using a node version that was often be several versions behind. And I think also some of these things with serverless has also been I didn't know the right tools for using serverless. And that I will come back to the tools, because I think that's actually unrelated to how you're going to deploy it, serverless, because knowing the right tools is how you're going to manage your project, and serverless is how you're going to deploy it. So what have I tried? I tried Amazon Lambda and API Gateway, and I think this is some of the first thing I've tried. Is since it launched, a lot of people have made these really easy wrappers around it that will basically deploy the API gateway for you and attach the Lambda function and set it up for you, so you didn't have to use CloudFormation, this huge JSON. But the problem has always been that you kind of had to then figure out the difference between API gateway and the Cloud Lambda. And if you also had to attach your own domain, you also had to figure out Route 53. And just a small nitpick detail, if you had to test your detail, you had to move your domain to Amazon Route 53, and then you had to set it up in the region of US East 1, and then you could attach and get some free certificate with certificate manager. And I did a workshop, and I think I made one person do it, even though you just had to do all these 20 steps. It's still too complicated and actually to figure out. Like, never had anyone like ever convinced somebody to actually continue using it. Then I also used like Google Cloud Functions, and that was actually pretty revelation. It was something where you uploaded the code. It could be a zip file. You could even do it through the interface, and it just gave you a URL back. It was like Amazon Lambda and API Gateway just like took the whole thing and reformed it. The problem was also that it was only for a long time only in US East, and I had an example of where I was asking like, when is it going to be deployed in Europe, because like you still have a significant transfer when you have to go across the ocean. But the problem was always like I wasn't in control, and the problem, that's a big no if you want to avoid vendor login, that you always have to ask somebody for permission. That's just a terrible way to work, and you're always kind of like depending on how quickly they make it, or even if they deprecate it. But then I began to look into something like external serverless providers. There was especially this company called Hyper.sh, which was basically a Chinese startup. I was so amazed by it because they basically made Docker hosting where you only paid per second the Docker container was running. But the problem was like, and also you can just see like this company has shut down. So even if you're dependent on that company, you basically had to migrate all your infrastructure away from it. And the servers or the web service I would have hosted on them, I would have had to spend more time now migrating. So that's not something for a busy developer to do. I also tried Heroku, and that sort of seemed like also a good idea. The problem was it was always like even more sometimes login or something like that, because you either had to do it the Heroku way or the highway. Like there was literally no other way of like sometimes changing some things. You didn't even have that good oversight of what the network was doing. They did introduce this Docker where you could introduce, but you're kind of also giving them the build pipeline and so forth. And you're basically saying like, I don't really care how my application is built. I just want to host it somewhere. So that was not for me, because like it's not fast, it's not cheap, and it's not flexible at all. Like even though Heroku like still like is part of Salesforce, it's definitely going to stay around, but I am not sure like how fast it sometimes iterate. And I think like just the smaller providers thing is like I tried a lot of other things. Like I think maybe you can also small providers include IBM in there, because like, they have something called OpenWhisk, but there's definitely somebody like nobody cares about, and that's just terrible to depend on something that nobody even know what is. So something I definitely always turned back to was the Docker containers, because they provide this like interface for doing something repetitive and also doing something that you could transfer between different cloud providers. And they provided the whole thing of like no login and predictable. But I think as anyone here maybe or has tried to do this, like this definitely difficult to host. I've done several meetups about like just figuring out how to host these Docker containers. And in reality, I think it's super interesting, but in the other reality, I also think it's like waste of time, because you're not actually making features and shipping product. And also another interesting trend is like when you're making like these Docker containers, people also want to split up. But once you have these microservices in a company, you often see like this trend of like difficulty as you get more and more microservices. I never seen a company like that says like, yes, I like configuring these 100 microservices to know which of them to connect to each other and how they're talking and which of them is up. And especially also if some of them goes down, what is actually the reason for all these services? What is like the whole network layer? So I think that's nothing that like the whole cloud providers can solve. They cannot solve like that your messy infrastructure happens to be running on serverless. That doesn't solve it at all. So that's about like the tools that you're using for these serverless providers. So with all these things, I think like you can say like enter Cloud Run, and it was something that was launched at this Cloud Next in May here in San Francisco in 2019. And it was super interesting because we actually had a meetup, about serverless in December in 2018, and this guy Martin, a Swedish guy, came by and he was showing Cloud Function, and he was asking like, if somebody wants to see something interesting or wants to join, he was giving invites for this product, and it was pretty cool because like I got invited to it and I saw it, and it was amazing because basically it has been what I have been dreaming about for so many years. Basically, since I discovered Docker, I've been looking for this product. The problem was I since January until launch, I wasn't allowed to talk about it. And I even asked like, how much are you allowed to talk about it? It's like, no, nothing about it. And it's like, that's damn, because like, I really said like, it's amazing. So what is Cloud Run exactly? It's basically, you take a Docker container, you upload it to Google Cloud, you listen on the environment port, and then you pay per gigabyte and request. Super simple. I think everyone can like basically imagine how it works. And the whole thing about it being so simple is like kind of also what makes it a little bit terrifying, because there must be some downsides. But there are kind of, obviously there are always downsides, but the whole thing is actually super interesting because it's built on this framework called Knative, which runs on top of Istio and then Kubernetes. And that's a lot of software on stack on top of each other. But the cool thing about that is actually you could deploy the whole thing if you wanted to. And I have done that. And the cool thing is also Cloud Run is not only a product that you can pay for manage, and we're going to look at that as well, but you can also actually host it on your own infrastructure, directly going in and seeing it on your own Kubernetes cluster in Google Cloud. So it's kind of mind-blowing that you can both get it managed and also host it. It's something, there's even more features, like you get free HTTPS also with webmaster tools. So the whole thing of Cloud Run is actually built into this whole Google Cloud platform and takes advantage of like features you already know. It also has stack driver. So all the logs you're used to seeing in Google Cloud that comes in, and the metrics comes into Stackdriver, so you can easily plot them the way that you're used to in other things. Scaling, basically you're allowed to go up to 1,000 containers, and I actually have problems just hitting it with how many requests per second. I did a demo also of it where I was basically hitting 1,000 requests per second, and it was because the limiting factor was just that I was actually running on a machine in Google Cloud, but it wasn't able to do many more requests than that. And if I did it on my own computer, it was even slower. So I haven't been able to max it out, and the max is actually 1,000 containers per project, so which is kind of insane. So I moved everything to Google Cloud. End of story. No, because as I told you, that doesn't fix all your problems. Your problem still is like, how do I deploy all these cloud functions? How do I keep them secret? Like, how do I build all these cloud functions? How do I manage with my colleagues and so forth? And this is all something like, if you're using a third party or something like that, you're kind of hoping that they implemented some enterprise features or organizations and such, but you're kind of left a little bit to your own. But basically, like, this is my new toolbox. And the cool thing is, like, these are all tools that are pretty simple in it itself, but you can combine them into making you basically a powerhouse of a developer. Like, these 5 tools is something that basically makes your whole application basically stack small things on top, but they're all approachable and you can teach them to everyone. So let me go through all these like small tools one at a time. Cloud Build is a CI/CD pipeline, and it builds into this like whole thing of Google IMA, where you can basically easily control like permissions for who has access to what. Google KMS is like key management, which is this idea of like, just because you're running serverless doesn't mean you have to give up on security, because like sometimes like that's the easiest thing when everything becomes like a Ragnarok, like you're just giving up on keeping everything like who has access to what. And then Berglas is this service where you basically easy secret management, because finding out how you get the private key or public key for that service, for that microservice, decrypting the secrets and then loading them into the application at runtime without just saving it into the container. This is what Berglas is for. And then Bazel is basically a tool built by Google. It's similar to what Google is running inside Google, where they're basically building whole Google, all the software. And Google, why they needed this tool is because Google has one repository. Imagine only one GitHub repository where Google has tens of millions of lines of code. Imagine every time you make a commit that you have to build the whole thing. That's impossible. So what you have to do is that you have to watch all these files. Did they change? And if they changed, then you have to rebuild that part. And the whole thing is because basically that's another talk, but it's basically about collaboration of knowing what to rebuild. Because imagine you are basically going from one monolith to 10 microservices to now 100 serverless functions. And figuring out the relationships between your 100 microservices of what libraries they use, and they don't use an insecure version. This is what Bazel can help you with. But I will basically give you a small demo of an app that I built and basically show you a little bit about what you can easily achieve. So here I have this small application. Oh, it was not the thing. So I have this small application here. You can see, not this. And it's basically just a small application, and we even have a secret in here where we just say process environment secret. We also have a version 1, so you can see we can maybe increment it easily. And up at the top, it's important we're listing on the environment port. So this one would actually, it will both run locally as well. So you would just say node server. And you will see listening on, and I think this will actually be undefined. So you can see here, basically empty. So what we can do here now is we need to have a Docker file so we can build it. And in here in our Docker file, we're basically copying in Berglas from the build Docker image into it. So our image actually looks super simple. And the interesting part is here we're using Berglas to start the web server. So Berglas will do this fetching of keys based on the permission that the runtime of Cloud Run. And then it would execute this and basically change out the secrets that we have. So our secret here, we have defined our build pipeline. And it'll look a little bit. But you can see the first thing here, we basically have, we're building our Docker project. Then the next one, we are pushing it. And then here is the interesting part. Here we're actually building this whole project and deploying it to Cloud Run. So here we're running the dcloud command, so we're saying beta run deploy. And down here we're actually setting the set environment where we're saying Berglas. And this is how Berglas knows how to change out our secrets. So sometimes people will begin to do the serverless thing, and then they will ask themselves how do I do the secret management? And this is something I really want to tell you. Using this approach will basically skip you through the confusing phase of convincing your boss to do this thing, because they will be it's not secure. This is secure, and it's actually, you can even run this not in Google Cloud, which is pretty impressive. And it will run in Kubernetes and so forth. So it's not just a tool specifically for Cloud Run, and that's kind of amazing. And you're basically also seeing here, we're basically saying platform managed, and this is where you're basically now you're basically forced to say, does it run on Google Cloud or on your own Kubernetes cluster? But I want to say, here we have a small command that says deploy, and this is the cool thing of some of these services. You can actually easily, I haven't seen Circle CI or anything doing like this. You can basically just zip the whole thing, send it to Cloud Build, and then we'll actually build it. So let's do that. So while we are waiting for it, basically tarring and then building a new version, we can basically look a little bit at the project. So in here we have Cloud Run, and Cloud Run is basically just another entry point here, but we can click here and we can see we have allow unauthenticated. Yeah. Oh, sorry. That's good you said that. But But you actually in here have all the interface for seeing what is going on. And we can see here we have our application that is redirecting. So here it works. And this is my secret. And this is basically a secret stored in Google Cloud Storage and de-encrypted whenever Google Cloud Run spins up a new instance of this Docker container. So we have seen here now it actually runs, and it takes around less than a minute to run this thing here, and we actually deployed a new version. So the last thing I maybe want to show you just a little bit about like how this whole Berglas, you're basically creating new secrets like this, where you're defining a bucket, because Google Berglas will put it into Google Cloud Storage and not store it anywhere. So we'll store it in a cloud bucket where everyone have access based on their Google Cloud permissions. This is the kind of, I think I'm mind blown about like how you basically have something that is production ready. You don't have to come up with your own approach about how to do this thing, or you can even do it temporarily. Like, I used KMS before, also on Amazon, but I never really felt like, yes, this is something I really like. But here actually I can say that it's beginning to make sense for me. But I also wanted to show you how you can basically set this up to be continuous deployment. So Cloud Build is in here, and it's a service where you can see like all your builds that basically has run, and you can see them. They are, the last one actually only took around 37 seconds. And in here you're basically saying triggers, connect the repository, GitHub, and then it will automatically connect with a GitHub application. So you can see I basically add a new one. Yeah, this is great. Oh my God. Maybe I'll just do this repository instead. But basically here you're seeing I connecting a repository, and it's because I only added those repositories to Google Cloud that I actually want them to access. And then I can create a push trigger and set it up. Here you basically have the enable, so every time you push on any branch, you'll maybe set it up to only on master you want to deploy. But basically now this works as continuous deployment. And I maybe want to show a little bit about how you would actually do it. This is something pretty cool. Also because like some of the things they basically saw that you're kind of don't want to mess with all these IMA roles. So they basically made it so you can click here and say enable, and then all your permissions will be defined. So I think that this is kind of what, so basically can say, I think some of these things are basically conclusion to not take the whole night. I could talk about this forever. But basically like the impressive thing is this loss leader for Google, because the reason why all other cloud providers have tried to do the serverless thing has closed down is because like they are not earning any money on you paying them pennies to run your Docker container on their project. So if you're running serverless functions, they are basically saying, yeah, we're betting on you becoming big, but if you don't, it's also okay because somebody else will pay your bill. So imagine all your side projects or forever basically will be able to run forever, and you don't even have to pay for it because you get a certain amount of requests and gigabyte seconds each month. There's also something about the tools, because if you combine Berglas with Bazel and you also think about doing these things where you only build what is necessary, you're basically setting yourself up for making something that scales up as you make more microservices. And also don't go down for security. I think never commit your secrets, even though it's maybe the easiest part of like putting them just into the repository, or figure out your own scheme of like private public keys. And also don't stop improving. I think like the whole thing about this whole journey of like making this serverless is something I trying to figure out, can we do this easier? Is it good enough for building a company on top? And I think you shouldn't be satisfied just because like some company or Kevin says that this is good enough. I think we can get much further, but it's amazing how far in 2019 that we can build something that reliable without login, that cheaply, that quickly. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.